quickly to let you know about what we've got upcoming in this series. So next month, third Wednesday of November, the topic will be Europe's feminist legacies. We'll be thinking about the way in which feminism kind of took root and is developed in Europe as opposed to other places in the world. That'll be the last of this semester. Next semester we've got one on, I should have brought this with me. We've got one on traveling in Europe. We've got one on missionaries in Europe, past, present, and future. So we've got a lot of good things lined up this semester. Without further ado, I'm going to turn the time over to Chip Oscarson, who has offered to moderate today's session.
All right. Thanks. We're happy to be here. My name is Chip Oscarson. I am Associate Professor of Interdisciplinary Humanities and Scandinavian Studies in the Department of Comparative Arts and Letters. And I'm the least expert of the people on the stage today, so my role is going to be more of kind of moderating the discussion. My particular background and interest has to do with Scandinavian studies, and kind of in the course of doing my work on Scandinavian studies, you can't get away from the Scandinavian design tradition if you're interested in visual art, which I am. And so that's kind of my point of contact here, but the people on the stand with me know far more about this topic than I do, and so let me introduce them real briefly. Here to my right is Richard Fry, who's Associate Professor of Industrial Design here at BYU. Richard, I understand you did your undergraduate here at BYU, yes, and then went on and did an MFA in Industrial Design at University of Illinois, right?
Right.
And then after you finished there, you went on and worked in private industry for a while, Whirlpool, yes, among other places?
Yes. It was funny because when I got the job at Whirlpool, I was in charge of laundry products for North America, and we were having a conversation about my mother actually beforehand, and it was strange to call home to my parents and say, I'm doing laundry at Whirlpool.
It probably made her very happy, actually.
For once, that's what it
is. For once, I'm doing laundry, right. So then after that, you ended up coming back to BYU, obviously, teaching here, and since you've been here, you've been both chair of your program and then most recently the director of the School of Technology.
Correct.
Right? So that's an impressive resume. Right now you're working on Qt.
I am working on Qt.
What's that all about?
Maybe I shouldn't have said that when we've had that. I've always been fascinated by Qt. I just didn't quite know it. And now I'm trying to look at and understand what I'm going to call a mature Qt. Cuteness beyond infants. We all have a cuteness and affinity to small children, at least when they're quiet and sleeping. But what are other aspects that affect us perhaps in the same way that drive an emotional response? That you, instead of saying nostalgia or any of these other different aesthetic emotional drivers, how do we react to Qt in more of a mature way?
So help us understand a little bit. I mean, we have probably a bunch of industrial design students here. I see a few that I know. But for the rest of us who don't know as much about this, what do you do? What do you teach? And we're going to talk a little bit more about design generally here in a minute.
Okay.
But how do you kind of see your area of not only expertise but of specialty at the university and teaching?
All of us in the industrial design program, there's only 4 professors, and we're all pretty generalists. But I teach basic drawing and visualization as a designer for students. I've worked through sort of some skill-based classes for designers in the sophomore year, but I teach product development studios for students. And here's some of our classes, for example. One of the product development studios in the junior level is doing a project with Tupperware where they're saying, how do we connect our brand, our products, our history to millennials? Who are they? What are their attitudes and behaviors, and how does that affect how we would design and develop product for sale? It's a very broad topic. There's a very loose schedule, and it's a very organic class that flows from the beginning to the end. Sometimes it's like the stagecoach careening down the gully to the edge of the Grand Canyon, and hopefully nobody falls off at the end, and we all arrive safely, and the client is happy. but they're very practical based.
I mean, there's a lot of social science in that. There's a lot of humanities in that, as well as engineering, of course. And
Correct.
It's
Just trying to put it all
Yeah.
together.
Okay, good. Yeah, I asked this question just because I think it's helpful, since the audience, you're going to have a chance to ask questions towards the end to know a little bit where our panelists are coming from. Might give you some ideas of some things to ask. So to my left, we have Marc Olivier, who also did his undergraduate degree here at BYU in French studies, and then went on to the University of Washington, where he did a master's and PhD. Looking through your CV, there were some interesting titles. You're a master of titles, I think, in your work. Well,
okay,
I don't know.
let's see.
Through a flea glass darkly, enlightened entomologist and the redemption of aesthetics in 18th century France.
That's my worst title.
Is that your worst
It's
title?
The
I
most
love that.
academic, lengthy. Yeah, that was about microscopes and entomology in the 18th century. I do a lot of work that's about science, technology, and the relation between those and literature, art, nostalgia in particular.
Right, and a lot about visual culture. You're a photographer,
Yeah.
among other things, right?
Yeah, I've done photography since I was little, and I've managed to rope it back into my teaching. So I've done some publications about photography and had some photography published.
Okay. So your most recent project that you're working on, one of the projects you're working on, you're involved in a lot of things, I realize, has to do with the role of domestic objects in horror film, and the kind of the design of these objects. What's that all about?
Well, so I've always been working. I was working for a long time on nostalgia and objects, and then I kind of decided to shift slightly, still focus on objects, but whenever I watch a movie, then I tend to watch the decor as much as the actors, and so I just thought, why not write a movie that only focuses on the objects? So you sort of make your way through a house and go through a chapter on each object in various rooms of the house. So sewing machines, house plant, you name it, it's pretty much in there.
Why horror?
I like to be scared, or like to try to be scared.
Is there something, though, about designed objects, domestic objects, and horror? I mean, is it the uncanny? Is that the kind of...
Yeah, well, I think that we wrap so much anxiety, it ends up being channeled through objects in a lot of ways, and maybe horror gives a voice to the objects that they don't otherwise have. So you all of a sudden, you not only have a sewing machine, but it's a sewing machine that's being used by some diabolical figure, or the object that's possessed, or the houseplant that eats you. So yeah, that's why. Okay,
that's good. Well, this kind of sets the stage well. So I think that for our discussion to to kind of lay a foundation for it, what are we talking about when we talk about design? What does this encompass? What is it? Why is it important? I mean, what's your takes on this?
I defer to yes.
I've been thinking about this because we were really talking about what do we want people to take away, and one of the things we have to help them understand is what is design. And a good friend of mine said, I'll make an engineering analogy, said that engineers use scientific principles to solve practical problems. And so if you look at it in reverse, with practical problems in the middle, designers tend to solve practical problems using artistic principles. So we both have an interest in our practical everyday life, but when you look at architects, illustrators, graphic communications designers, interior designers, industrial designers, we're working at solving practical problems like I need a place to live, I need clothes to wear, I need a vehicle, I need an environment in which to work. But rather than dealing solely functionally, we like to look at what are the values, what are the ways people can express themselves, or how can their environment help them express themselves or achieve a certain amount of satisfaction in their daily life sort of through these objects. So we look at practical problems from an artistic principle side rather than strictly a functional side.
Yeah. So when we talk about the notion of European design, this is a pretty fuzzy notion, right? Where does it come from? I mean, why do we talk about there being something unique about design in a European context? Because from what you're saying, design is everywhere, right? I mean,
Correct.
we can't, we wake up, our lives are both shaped, and we shape our lives, through design. It's all around us. The chairs, that we're sitting in here, the glasses, the bottles, the walls, everything, that there was a designer of some form at some point in time who came up with this stuff. I mean, is there such a thing as European design? I mean, what are we talking about?
I would say that there is and there isn't. If somebody was telling me, a colleague earlier, I don't know, it's a Friends episode or something, where somebody's going to China and they say, oh, be sure and eat some Chinese food while you're there. And then they say, I think they just call it food. and I think that like nobody in Europe says, oh, I'm doing European design.
Yeah.
It's always defined in opposition to something else. So usually America maybe has this bigger role in defining what European design is, maybe in opposition to America. So it exists, but it exists because
it's in comparison.
make it. Yeah.
Has it always existed, and maybe European design is maybe that's not a good example. Maybe we should be talking about French design or Scandinavian design or Italian design, right? I mean, when do these concepts begin to circulate as coherent ideas?
Well, there's one aspect is when did maybe design in general sort of come about, and who knows exactly? I don't know exactly when design came about, but one of those things is when you made a shift from being craftsmen to then the division of labor, where you had people who envisioned, people who made, people who decorated, people who sold, as opposed to the clockmaker who envisioned, designed, built, got in his little cart and went around to 20-mile radius around his workshop and was limited there. So when you finally separated that out, this notion of design, potentially designers who are just in the envisioning stage, they would exist. And you have, once that happened, then you are influenced still by your culture and where you are and what kind of designer and what's happening, what's informing your process. That's when that finally starts to take root, when you can actually concentrate on just that rather than everything else.
Right, like there's plenty of things that you could say, oh, well, everything's designed at some point, but like take sewing machines in the 19th century, a lot of the design is actually decoration that's added after the fact, and so it's not integrated in the way that what we think of industrial design today would be, I think. So there's a natural kind of tension between style and design. And one of the problems that France has had is they don't want to be thought of as just style. And yet that's been a lot of what they're about. In fact, like back in the 20s when they had the Art Décoratif 1925 Expo, then one of their concerns was, well, we're known for certain styles like Empire style or Louis XVI, and those styles have come out of copyright now, and anybody can just do them, and so we need to modernize and create something new just to remain relevant. You don't want to just be stuck in a museum culture.
Yeah. So that's interesting. I mean, it's interesting to think how there are these kind of, I don't know if you want to call them design forces, but things that are affecting design that end up affecting me without me ever making a conscious choice about it, right? That there are, different, kind of elements of workflow that when I go to the store and I think I'm choosing, right? And that I'm the one with choice, but that's not really the case.
Well, so let's go back to maybe this comparison and trying to define European design and contrast that a little bit with American design. There was we're talking historically, there was an event where at the Great Exposition in 1851,
Crystal Palace.
Crystal
London.
Palace, everything. The Americans brought over all kinds of mechanical devices, things that they were using as they built their country, as they plowed fields, as they chopped down trees, as they built roads, and you had steam engines from the European side, you had steam engines that looked like Egyptian temples. They had columns, they had sphinxes, you had urns encrusted with angels, and the Americans bring over this thing called the McCormick Reaper, which is a way to reap wheat, a field of wheat, but it's attached to a steam engine. It gets pulled across the field with giant arms and big rollers, and they're saying, what a disgusting, ugly machine. But from the American standpoint, this is what we need. It's very practical. It does things efficiently. We're not worried about decoration. We're worried about function. When I worked for Whirlpool, and that's reinforced by this experience when I worked for Whirlpool, we were doing some market research on a new washing machine. It didn't have an agitator. Nobody didn't have an agitator at that point. Now a lot of people don't have agitators. But it was a wet towel test where you put a wet towel on the bottom of the machine, and then you have to pull it out and rate how hard was that. And we knew that one of these tubs was very deep, and in order to get a wet towel out of the bottom, it was going to be very difficult. And we put a little step stool by the side. We didn't say anything, and if you had a problem, you could pull the step stool over. This one woman pulled the step stool over after she put that in. She couldn't reach down far enough. She pulled it out, and we said, which one would you buy? Oh, definitely this one. You must have a lot of laundry to do at your house. Oh, no, it's just my mother and I. Well, why would you get the largest one? Well, if both prices are the same, I'm going to make sure I get the biggest for the same price. So Americans are often driven by getting the most for the least. Whether I need it or not, I want value. And that might be a different expression between Europe, where things are small, things are tight, civilization has developed longer, things have been in existence. If you want to build a McDonald's, you don't tear down the Gold's Gym that was there and put a McDonald's in. You have to carefully renovate the 600 to 1,200-year-old building that the city council has allowed you to use for the McDonald's. So there's a different approach because of the different infrastructures and the way kind of we treat our
Well,
environment.
and different values is what you're saying
Yeah,
too,
different
right? That we
values.
value maybe different things, or we tend to value different things here in the United States. So what might some of these European values be? And again, Europe is a hard concept, right? Because we're talking about a continent that has incredible amount of diversity. So maybe that's not so easy to answer, on a universal and kind of general level. But what are some of these values that are manifest in Europe? Do you think? You mentioned one economy. That certainly is.
Well, if you talk about design in Italy in post-World War II into the 60s and the 70s, only one word's going to come to mind, and that's passion. And they're going to be very expressive. They're going to be red. Everything's going to be red that comes from Italy. They're going to push. If it doesn't excite you, it's not worth having. So in terms of Italy, passion and excitement come to mind.
All right. How about France?
Well, for
Or whatever
France-
other context you
Well,
want.
okay. Well, yes, France. It's their love-hate relationship with their own history, because they were known as a center for luxury, and they were tastemakers for all of Europe. But then you also sometimes feel oppressed by that history, and you want to break out of it. So they look, for example, at modernism that was already happening in Italy and in Germany before they were doing any of it, and then they want to figure out ways to catch up. And but how do you do that when you're so anchored in old traditions? So the problem there is basically the problem of history and what your identity, what your relationship is to history. In America, our relation to history is kind of that we borrow it from other people, or we reference it, or we consume it. And so
Destroy it and start over.
Well, yeah, and so part of our consumption of design in America, or if you're buying furniture or whatever, something that's from Europe, is that you're wanting to add that history to your life, or represent it in some way, or I don't know.
Yeah.
So let me make a quick. Let's run through maybe a few other countries.
Yeah.
You mentioned, Germany. Some of those values being very rational,
Yeah.
ordered,
Scandinavia, that's a kind of a really strong guiding principle. I mean, the whole idea of functionality, right?
And well, and
continues to be really
functionality, and maybe they absorb, recognize, hold on to their past, and that the craft is important. Natural materials combined with modern production. There's there's a certain quirkiness that kind of exists, maybe because they recognize, what happens when we have half a year of darkness, or half a year where
That's right.
we never go to bed.
Well, the really bright colors are, I mean, that
Yes.
are incorporated, a lot of times, I mean, along with the natural materials, right? Lots of woods and things like that, and a lot that they do, but combined with these really bold colors are very, very specifically because of, that fact that it's really dark for half the
Yeah,
year.
so there are a whole lot of values
Yeah.
that change as you go across.
And if you're in a building that was, from that was built maybe towards the end of the 19th century, you don't obsess about whether your house has crown moldings or not like we do in America, because it just does. And so you can play against the history and against those spaces that are already there. So I think everything plays into the pre-existing environment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, another thing that strikes me, Northern Europe particularly is very invested in the idea of environmentally friendly and sustainable now, right? And that's something that's been, in recent decades, but you can kind of go back, pretty far into the 20th century where it was about efficiency, and economy, right? And it's not about kind of size, right? That you're willing to pay more sometimes for the smaller, more efficient, right? I mean, and this is exactly what VW was selling, right?
Smaller, more efficient.
Yeah.
Only when
Even
we
if
want
you
it to be.
Yeah, that's right. If you want it to be, that's right. So what's happened to these? We're moving from a point in the 20th century where, that individual national traditions had a certain kind of coherence. Because of the way time and space is organized. But the farther we get into the 20th century, the more global the world becomes, that there's much more interchange.
We've finished the 20th century.
Right. Well, I'm getting there, right? And so, and then, moving now into the 21st century, we're clearly in a different place, right? So what happens to the whole idea of a national design tradition? Does that make sense anymore? Or is it just a marketing strategy? I think about IKEA, for example. I mean, this is the most obvious one that leaps to mind, where when you go to buy something at IKEA, I mean, you think about all the ways that you're being told that this is a Swedish product. Now, it was not made in Sweden.
Yeah, like you can't pronounce any of the names.
They intentionally use very kind of funky names.
Right.
Some of them, most of them actually are made up words, that sound Scandinavian. Some of them aren't.
I knew it.
They put Swedish books on the shelves, which you cannot buy. I've tried. And the colors are blue and yellow, right? That these are kind of the national colors. So even if you don't know very much about Sweden, you're being reminded at every turn that this is somehow Swedish. Now, what actually of the process that produces all of those things is in Sweden? Your designers and engineers might be in Sweden.
Yeah.
But that might be it.
Some of our students went on a study abroad recently, and I think they have 18 designers, 6 designers, or a very small amount in-house, and only another amount that access consultants, but it's not very large. It's very nicely, I guess.
Even though they market them, right? They put their faces.
They put their faces, but it's a very few, and it's done very efficiently.
Yeah.
It doesn't take much. I mean, how many different ways can you attach plywood to itself?
So Scandinavian design is, when people think of, I sort of very informally asked some people, what do you think of when you think of European design? And there's kind of 2 main strains, where they have the super tradition of luxury and kind of old world, and then there's Scandinavian design. And when you look at what's popular right now, then it's definitely Scandinavian. And I think there's got to be a moral component that goes with that. You're talking about eco-friendly and functionalism, as opposed to decadence and being anchored in our old ways. And so there's this moral side to what you consume that I think steers away from other national traditions. Mm-hmm. And it's easier. I mean, it still works okay with Germany. There's, I mean, you know, Bauhaus design is alive and well. There's lots of chairs that were designed in the 20s that are, you know, or 30s that are still best sellers in sites like Design Within Reach or, you know, whatever, wherever you buy your online.
So if we go back and think about those times when there were design heroes, you know, think of when you go to a design history class, all these famous names keep coming up, but you think of the infrastructure that existed. So you had a manufacturer who had a plant. It was local. Transportation was expensive. Gasoline post World War II, you didn't have a lot of that. There weren't a lot of vehicles. So you had a factory close to the company that was making this product. You had to have close ties with your designer because you didn't have email, Skype, and you're mailing things back and forth or talking on the telephone. You can't really describe something over the phone. So there needs to be a close relationship. And once you've invested a certain amount of time in a designer, an interior designer, an architect, an illustrator, graphic designer, somebody that you worked with, a textile designer, they were your go-to person. And so as a manufacturer, I could just go back to that person. And pretty soon their name is attached to everything. And they, not because they're so fantastic, but because they got used an awful lot, they become this superstar. Who was the designer of this piece that we're showcasing in this magazine this month? Well, it's the same person, man, woman, that we had last month or 6 months ago or last year at the same time.
But now it's not.
Yeah, now
Yeah.
the amount of communication possible and the disconnectedness of manufacturing from where the company is allows the designer to be anyone and anywhere. And we no longer see these names arise as superstars.
Yeah, I mean, who do people know if you just think, like, what current living designers do you know? And it's like, I don't know, Philippe Starck.
Well, that have lasted more than 5 years. Because there might be some you know now, but 5 years from now, their name probably won't be popping up in the same way.
It seems like today it's more about taste and curation. When you look at what people do and people who follow, so like you take a blog like Design Sponge, a big design blog, and she may feature some person, and you may even go into their apartment, and then they'll say, oh, the favorite thing about my house is this, and you talk all about them, but then that's it. You're never going to follow what else they do. You're never going to have other products. It's one post, and you move on, and it's all about the cult of taste, and who's the arbiter of taste?
Well, and who's the curator?
Yeah.
Whereas before, it might have been the company or the manufacturer, the Herman Millers, the Knowles, for furniture, Vitra. As opposed to now, it's somebody with a blog.
Yeah, like Design Mom or something.
Yeah.
Mormon, I believe.
And so they're the curators, and you're
made that
focused
up.
more on the object as opposed to who designed it, who
Yeah,
manufactured it.
yeah. Well, and so this is another thing that I think sort of ties to the European issue of design. I mean, one thing, I guess, is you're reading blogs, you're probably reading them in English, so your go-to for, even though they may be choosing things, it's going to be filtered through an American lens. And then another thing I was thinking is that probably hipsters have a lot to do with destroying European design in a way, because it's all this sort of rough-hewn aesthetic that's all frontiersy and locally sourced, and it's the antithesis of most European design. It's very, very American, and I think I was talking to Rob McFarland from German, and he said that in Germany they talk about the Brooklynization. Ah, there you are. The Brooklynization of Berlin, for example. And so there's this idea, I mean, in France, they've talked for years about the McDonaldization of France. I'd rather have it be the Brooklynization, at least, that's cooler than fast food. But yeah, so I think that a lot of current trends are not super compatible with maybe European history.
So what's the difference then between, another way of getting at this would be to say that there's a difference, and you can explain to me if you think this is right, between a national tradition, which and a style, right? And,
Yeah.
and it sounds like we're more in the realm of style, right? That as a designer, I might choose to make something reminiscent of, kind of Scandinavian or Italian, kind of thing. But I kind of tried these on and off in a way that maybe this didn't happen before.
Well, so let's talk about, again, that difference as things go across the ocean. One of the things that I recognize about the difference between European design and American design is that European design has a reason. Passion, again, is politics, it's a social statement. There's some, we're rejecting our history, and so we're going to turn to a new style, not because we're tired of the old style, but we're tired of the values, we're tired of the oppression, and they're passionate about it, and they get together and they write a manifesto. Manifestos are always part of European design and never really about American design. So they have a manifesto, and they go out and they do stuff, and then people go, that's awesome, we like that, that's really great. And travelers, American travelers through Europe will say, I love this, I love this, I love this. They'll come back. None of the politics will follow them. And when it comes to the United States, it comes as a style. Mm-hmm. So even though we recognize European design with stylistic chunks, the style was always motivated from a principle, and then it came over to the United States and became a style. So we talk about European design and we talk about Euro style. Mm-hmm. Well, nobody really knows what it is, but man, I kind of know it when I see it, not when I experience it, not when I am excited by an impassioned speech surrounding this, but when I see it at a store.
Now, are you talking historically? Is it possible, for these kind of manifesto movements to still take hold today, or have we moved away from the the kind of social conditions that make that possible?
I think we've moved past it.
Yeah.
You do?
Yeah. There are small groups will get together and have a little manifesto and say, this is what we'd like to do. But it's less about world changing and more about...
But in consumption, I think it's more than it used to be. I think when you look at from the angle of the consumer, then people are more aware of like, where did this come from and what's the effect on the world, and and what is the value behind it, or what am I saying about myself from this? No,
I can see I can see that, but I would say that that's less of a manifesto from the designer's standpoint and more of a manifesto from the consumer standpoint.
Right.
So I have a personal manifesto of things. I'm going to curate my own life in a certain way. And so, but I will pick from a random variety of sources in order to do that, as opposed to thinking of, here are the Italian futurists. And they're projecting glorification of modern life in an extreme way. So we're seeing that less from the producers, and like I said, maybe more from the consumer side.
Now, is part of this just kind of the benefit of historical hindsight? That that we talk about some of these movements as if they're coherent, well thought out,
Yeah, some of them were coherent, but most of them we only see in hindsight.
So, can you also say that to a degree, maybe not to the degree we see today, that this kind of consumption-driven, I don't know if we're saying consumption-driven design, but consumption-driven economy was that true back then too, or is that something that's unique to today? And what does that? How does that project out then going forward?
Well, one thing about that, just the. I think the relation there, a lot of the anxiety has to do with the public's degree of taste. And there's this battle. You look at the founding of the MoMA in New York. That is tied right into some reaction about fear of American taste level being so low. And so you want to educate the public. And then you have a lot of the founders of industrial design in America who say that, for example, you can get people more into avant-garde art through the packaging of cigarettes, than you can from a museum. And they actually believe that we're going to change the taste of the people in order to elevate design. And the way that we can do that, I've read luncheon notes from where you have somebody from Macy's with like Raymond Loewy and Henry Dreyfuss, big industrial designers, and they're all meeting together talking about radios and which ones sell and which ones don't, and how horribly ugly they are and what can we do to improve the level of taste. So I think it's almost a battle, at least traditionally, in trying to not pander to the lowest common denominator, but then you also have to sell things. So, yeah.
So this is in Sweden in the 30s, right, where this kind of aesthetic that we've been talking about really breaks through. It is completely driven by that, right? This idea that we need to shape society. And there's a great manifesto, kind of tracked by Gunnar Asplund and some other kind of high-profile figures. That's called Accept. And they distinguish between Europe A and Europe B. And Europe A is this kind of forward-looking, modern, progressive society, and Europe B is, stuck in the past, and this kind of, the baggage of the past that's holding us back, making us provincial, and things like this. And that we have to design to kind of push our culture, into that realm. I don't know if you can get away with that, kind of thing today.
So I'm going to maybe link to that. And another difference between European design and American design is that most European countries recognize what design is. Government officials have a knowledge of what it is, and they recognize that we can use this, our identity, the type of products we make, the image that we sell, things we export. We can use that to our strategic advantage as a country. So they will promote and support designers from their country as well, I would say design heroes, but I mean as cultural figures. And so, whereas Americans, companies know who designers are, but people don't really know, or the government doesn't recognize that aspect, using artistic principles to solve practical problems. They don't recognize that and support it as well. So there are government efforts, perhaps creating a manifesto about Europe A and Europe B. There are grants in Europe that help designers work to experiment and create culture. And there are centers, as China, we're going to shift from Europe to Asia, as China develops, they have created design agencies. That's not the word, the cabinet.
Firms.
Some kind of government agency, but
Bureau or something.
Bureau, yes, like the Bureau of Design. So they will have conferences where they invite people from all over the world. And it's a government-driven thing to say, we'd like you to use our designers, understand design in China, understand our capabilities, how we might help you. So they promote design as a resource, whereas they don't.
Well, yeah, isn't there, there's a European design initiative, I think that's just in recent years, right, where they're trying to work out issues of, unified statements on copyright, or...
Right. The UK has the Design Council.
Yeah, and fund design. You don't feel that same degree in America of support or interest in...
Well, you see, in Europe, you'll see museums of design, right, that
Right.
host competitions and, things like this, on a regular basis to promote up and coming, innovative.
It was only in the last, say, 5 years that the Cooper Hewitt Museum really, in New York, really became a design-centric museum, not just for past, but for present and future, as opposed to just a kind of a historical storehouse.
I was at the Cooper Hewitt working on this show that I curated a while back, right when they shifted who was in charge, and the curators there were not happy.
Yeah.
They were pretty upset that everything's going too commercial is what their view was, and that we're just trying to turn this into something that will generate ticket sales rather than maintain the sort of integrity. Yeah, there were a lot of strong feelings from.
Well, wait, say the integrity of what though? The integrity of the kind of the artist-driven design model,
and also shows that that maybe don't feel as marketable, but that have maybe scholarly depth, and then instead you're going to choose something that just advertises well. I mean, that's their, that's
Yeah.
their view. I'm not saying that it's all of a sudden gone downhill in
Yeah.
reality, but yeah.
Okay, so what have we missed in our conversation here about thinking about the future of design? What are some of the major impulses and trends that we're likely to see going forward, and what's going to be driving those?
Big one, the shared economy. So when you talk, so in the past we talk about designers as designers of environments and objects, whereas now you would argue that the largest hotel company owns no hotels, and that would be Airbnb. And so here you have, there's no designer who's saying, what do our hotels look like? How do we represent ourselves? The designers, the people who are solving the problems, are solving these problems of sharing. Uber, where I don't care what the cars look like. I don't care what uniforms the drivers wear. I don't care about the design of there's no toll box in their cab. And all those problems are about organization and hooking people together and driving services as opposed to driving objects. So as we shift into less ownership and more sharing, our notions of design and what we own and what those objects say about us will definitely change.
That's interesting.
That's interesting. I'm still processing that. That's really fascinating and probably horrifying if you're a designer. I mean,
Well, industrial designer, but I'm thinking
Yeah.
graphic design. How important some of that is. For,
Well, yeah, in terms of
right?
interface now.
Yeah.
And what's the experience of using that app?
Yeah.
And how do I connect these people? How seamless is it? How
But that's driven
happy-
by consumption too in a new kind of way.
It is. Another thing that's driving it is the complete democratization of manufacturing. Your access to manufacturing facilities, funding, distribution. Whereas before, that individual designer needed to connect up with that company who had a factory close by, and our infrastructure was small. But now I can put a project on Kickstarter and get funding using Google SketchUp as my CAD program, which is freeware, which allows me then to post a model on Alibaba.com and get quotes, and an excess factory in China, or China with excess processing power, that's the wrong term to use for manufacturing, but a capacity, excess capacity, can say, yeah, I can do that in 2 months from November to December 31st because we have nothing really going on, and I'm willing to do a small run for you. And in fact, we have, my friend also runs, I can just ship to him instead of you. You just email us the Excel spreadsheet of all your customers who've ordered, and we'll drop ship it to their homes. So you have someone who no longer needs to be connected to all of these things physically and can just take advantage of extra capacity, become their own designer, manufacturer, and distributor. They build their own brand, and then they're kind of stuck because they didn't expect to do that. And everyone's going, okay, what's next? So anyway, the individual as designer is another one that's going to throw that design hero and European design versus American design for a loop.
So what are your students going to be doing?
Never before have we had more students take entrepreneurial projects on before graduation and have really their own brand and their own product line. It is interesting. Also, in the United States, our graduates, we used to say, after you've worked in the industry, then you kind of enter into management and you start leading projects. We see that happening faster and faster because the designer in the individual country is more the champion of the values of that market space. I will send the manufacturing out. I don't care whether it's in China or the Philippines or Germany or Italy. I don't even need to know, but I'm managing what it means here, and then I'm just sort of connecting to engineers somewhere else, manufacturers somewhere else. And I don't.
Well, you know, it's what France was saying when they were very anxious about everybody being modern before they were. Their only hope was that they say, you know, no other country can say made in France on their label. And so really what they're selling is not any unique design per se. They're selling the place, and that you can't take away. So as long as we care about things like that, then we care about but this is made in France.
And we might end up back there because
Yeah, I was gonna say, would there be a
distributed so
backlash to
far,
this eventually?
and now we might come back because you no longer have to you have to sell 200 million. And I'll go back to that clockmaker who could only sell within 20 miles of his home or shop, and once he'd sold everybody that could afford a clock, he's kind of done. Whereas now somebody in their garage making clocks puts it online and sells it through eBay or Amazon, and the whole world is their shop. But so then you can start to say, I want something made by this person. I don't really care where they are, but that person becomes my curator, my style master for a particular aspect of my life. Or France can start to say, you know what, we'll still ship everywhere, but it's still us right here, and you can only buy that.
And
product.
yeah, that was always their thing. I mean, you just go into Colette in Paris, the little shishi store, and you see that they've chosen 10 CDs that you can buy. Those are the cool ones, or you know what water people are drinking, or you know, that's the thing, is they're selling their taste. They're selling something that they feel like they can offer because of where they are that nobody else can.
Yeah, that's good. Let's open this up a little bit. What kind of questions do you guys have? If you'd come over here to the microphone, speak on the microphone. This is being broadcast, so that's how we'll, or broadcast tomorrow. That's how we'll be able to hear you on the radio. So come over here and queue up, and we'll go through as many of those questions as we can.
If you have any. If you don't, start thinking madly.
Yeah, please ask questions.
Okay, I'm going to ask while people are queuing here. So I go to RC Willie,
Awesome.
or I go to a furniture shop in Barcelona. And I go to RC Willie, and I may see one couch I want to buy out of 3,000. And I go to Barcelona, I see 12 out of 20 that I want to buy. Is that because of the imaginative limitations of the American designer or of the American consumer? Or who's determining that I need those couches at RC Willie? You know, are they? Is it just the people in North Carolina designing them who lack imagination, or is it this they perceive American consumers don't want anything with this pushing edges? And, you know, you could do the same thing with go to a Chevy dealership versus a Fiat dealership. What accounts for the differences there?
Do you want to try that?
Well, I mean, it's the same thing like I mentioned with the radios, where the department stores are saying, you know, here's what people buy, and then we don't want to sell them this. It's also the space and what our values are. So Americans a lot of time value comfort. And I mean, those lazy boy chairs, as ugly as they are, they're
maybe appearance of comfort, whether it's true or not.
yeah, just lots of billowy stuffing.
It's the largest capacity
giant
washer that I'm going to take.
Yeah, I mean, because honestly, like, I like real minimalist design, but the truth is, you can go to RC Willie and sit in something that might feel better, maybe. I mean, but my trade-off is I would rather have the thing that I like to look at, even if it's slightly less comfortable. But that's more of a European value. Not that it has to not be comfortable, you know.
So there's another aspect to this, is that it's easier to make, it's harder to make clean, simple. Things have to be hidden. There's new manufacturing processes. The appearance of something that's clean and simple is often very complex underneath. And so it's much easier, which then translates into lower price, to make something that's traditional, we've done before, or I don't really need to worry, I'm going to upholster everything so I can cover up all my manufacturing defects. So when we pull out our wallets, and Raymond Loewy said, all things being equal, price and performance being equal, the most beautiful will win out. But if, let's say, price is not equal, when I pull out my wallet, I'm going to probably buy something that I feel somewhat good about, but doesn't break the bank. And so economics is driving an awful lot of that in the United States as well.
Good. Next question.
We've talked a lot about how about consumers leading the industry of design, and which made me think about a documentary that I've seen called Objectified. I'm sure many of us have seen that here. And I was interested at the fact of how fast the exponential growth of design happens nowadays, where even we see it a lot in technology, where things become obsolete within quarters of a year, things like that. My question is there a group of design or a certain design that beats the consumer, or that is ahead of that curve instead of the consumer leading design?
The answer is yes, of course. There's always a group that's going to be ahead of the consumer, but whether they're ahead in the right direction or not, whether the consumer is actually following them or going off some other direction. There's lots of people that are experimenting with different technologies, different aesthetics. There's a group of people who are trying to design products right now using rapid prototyping technology as the manufacturing process. Well, consumers might never care that I can go to Walmart, swipe my credit card, select from 15 different products, start at printing, go do my grocery shopping, and come back. They're saying, you know what? The finish isn't that great. It's customized, but I had to wait 45 extra minutes. And so, again, there's always somebody ahead, but it's not necessarily where the consumer might be going.
Good.
Good answer.
Next question.
Yeah, so it's been interesting to think about the idea of outsourcing manufacturing to Asia and being more democratized with the resources of producing things and designing things. But thinking of Asia as coming into its own as a design force for itself, I mean, Asian culture is also very old, of course,
yes.
And they have their own values that are very deep set. And so I'm wondering, has it already started to influence the world in terms of making a design statement for itself? In manufacturing things, or do you think it still has to kind of get there?
Yes. So it has started to make a name. There are a whole series of Chinese fashion designers, graphic designers, industrial designers that are making a name for themselves internationally, but have also tried to turn back and say, okay, what are we going to do for our country? How is our country going to support us? But there's an infrastructure there that's been outward focused, that's now kind of turning inward focused to say, okay, now how can we work on internal transportation and communication? How can we build the middle class to provide the driving force of consumerism perhaps in China? And I think once that kicks off, what you're going to see is instead of China being the manufacturer for the world, you're going to see China being the manufacturer for China, because its market will be big enough to where all I need to do, why should I deal with people overseas when I can just now turn to my own country and have plenty of options to sell things? So in that regard, I don't know that China has been an influence greatly on design in the United States or in Europe. It's mostly serviced those industries, but it does have huge potential within itself to make an impact. And then once they become a power there, then it might influence outside.
And it's more likely, I think, that as far as it being an export or a Chinese design aesthetic, it's more likely that be filtered through Europe. I think, at least from what I've seen more of European people deciding, what Chinese architects are interesting or whatever, than maybe the U.S. We seem to be just thinking in terms of they're manufacturing our stuff. Yeah.
Thanks.
My question, sorry, has more to do with, you had talked about the sharing economy and about how like our experiences with physical products are diminished as they're shared. Also kind of with digital technologies being the value that's provided in our transactions. Do you see that, or how will that affect industrial design? Does it make it less relevant as things like graphic design or other forms of design become more important? What are your thoughts?
No. And I'll use graphic design. I don't know the future of industrial design. It's always on our mind. I mean, the tales of our demise have been greatly exaggerated. Even as China kind of exploded, and there were talk of what's called design elves, people that worked at Chinese factories that were great industrial designers that could work. They worked through the night, and all of a sudden you got a product. That would somehow destroy our industry, but it hasn't. It's changed a little bit. But I'm gonna use the graphic design example. Desktop publishing came about, and graphic design was going to be dead. Everyone was a desktop publisher. Well, we all know
So we had to suffer really bad design.
So we had to
for a while.
suffer, yes, really bad design, and it shifted. And so this whole, the graphic design contribution to user experience and user interaction design, a whole new format that came about, a whole new device set that now rather than the printed word, I have the displayed word. And not only just word, but interactions now. And so all of a sudden, graphic design, well, not all of a sudden, but over time again, it has come back out of the desktop publishing nightmare and reinvented itself. And I think all the design disciplines, architecture is the same way. That now all of a sudden you go through, there's a DIY phase, but then there's manufactured homes. You can think of that in a negative term in terms of mobile homes, trailer parks. But then you've got these great homes now that are manufactured in a factory setting to exacting standards, transported, and they're very aesthetic, designed, energy efficient, and they're kind of a growing rage. So I think each one of these fields will change and morph as their culture and circumstances.
The expertise of the designer is changing significantly as well, is what you're saying.
You know what? So I would say the core expertise of understanding human values and working to solve practical problems has not changed and probably never will.
But the tools.
But the tools are when you didn't have computer renderings and you had to be, as an industrial designer, you had to really be an illustrator. Raymond Loewy coming from advertising and the whole illustration, his ability to draw trains served him well. Whereas now it's like, I don't need to draw a train because I can create one and render it. I need to understand the values and why that train is important and what it's doing for my customer. And Raymond Loewy was doing that, but it was kind of masked by all these old technologies that he had to use to communicate. And that's kind of the communication struggle is disappearing.
Yeah, good. Okay, we have time for one last question, I think. As long as it's not too long.
So we've talked about how there's a stark contrast in design across cultures. I'm taking a class that's talking about global capitalism right now, and some of that has been alluded to already. But there are products that are designed with like a global market in mind, like Apple, for example. There are iPhones in countries all over the world. Is there a certain aesthetic or a design that seems to transcend a cultural divide, or is that always a barrier?
It's not called aesthetic. It's called lifestyle. The aesthetic serves the lifestyle that the brand is promoting. So I'm not going to say that. So Apple is a global brand, but I don't know that it's a global aesthetic. It's very minimal. We all accept it, but we accept it because we buy into the brand, and we like the lifestyle and the things that it says about us. So going back to France, being the tastemakers, other people have sort of created the hipster lifestyle. Whatever it might be, you buy into that, and then that aesthetic becomes universally acceptable to you wherever you might be.
But you look at like, Apple advertising when the iMac first came out, then they did that really famous award-winning ad of "Tears to the Great Ones," and it shows all these grainy black and white images of famous figures throughout history that they're sort of grafting on. I mean, none of those people ever used a computer in their life. It's got like Gandhi and Martha Graham and Jim Henson and all these people, but that's
They're
what they've
building the
done,
lifestyle.
and so that's what they're selling they're selling you as the next, important figure, thanks to their product. Yeah.
Okay. I think we're all excited to go and buy some well-designed products in Europe, not anywhere locally.
I don't know.
IKEA,
RC
Point of
Willie
the
is an
Mountain.
awesome experience. They got a waterfall.
They do. Just a couple of quick thank yous here before we adjourn. First, thank you to Kelly Blazian for helping coordinate this event. Thanks to Nellie Ashby. We have a reception afterwards. She's arranged for us to have pie. She said it had nothing to do with design. She just felt like pie, and so there is pie out there. Let's give a big hand to our three participants today. And we're going to let them slip out that door so they can all mingle with you all over pie here. Thank you very much for coming.